Hello, friends, and welcome back to another episode of the Liberty Weekly Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Patrick McFarland, and today I am very glad to be joined by TJ Roberts. TJ, how's it going, man?
It's going well. Thanks for having me on.
Of course, my pleasure. And just for everyone in the audience who's not familiar with you and your work, do you just want to introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name is TJ Roberts. I am a rising second-year law school student at Solomon P. Chase, Northern Kentucky University School of Law. I have worked as an election director for Mobilize the Message. I've worked as an election coordinator at Young Americans for Liberty. I'm a former state chair at YAL as well. I've done work in writing articles for websites like the Advocates for Self-Government and Mises.org. I have a few articles published in various other outlets as well. Particularly, the thing that I've been involved in lately has been resisting the lockdowns. In Kentucky, I'm the person who filed suit against Governor Andy Beshear after he threatened to imprison me for up to a year for going to church. That's one of the big ones for it. And ever since, I've been just involved in the fight for freedom, focusing particularly in Kentucky of what needs to be done in order to have a freer future in this state.
So are you able to talk about like the facts of what happened?
Sure. Yeah, I'm able to. The cases are pretty much entirely settled with the preliminary injunctions. We're still waiting on final judgment for a few of them, but it's relatively there, like, of what all happened. Which one do you want to do first? Do you want to do church or protest?
Let's do church first.
All right. So the church case, this was Roberts versus Nice. I've been a Christian for about 10 years now. I've always tried to make it a point to go to church when I am able to, and I went pretty much weekly. In March, the lockdowns were starting. A lot of people were scared, and Andy Beshear decided he was going to save Kentucky from itself by locking down. You would think from a liberty perspective this would not have been an insanely popular move, but it was. Andy Beshear, at the time of me filing this lawsuit, had a greater than 80% approval rating. This actually affected me in two ways. First, I was volunteering and managing a campaign for State House in Ohio. He closed the border between Kentucky and Ohio. And second, he banned church as well. He made it where you cannot have in-person church services. And he specifically pointed out that for people who want to go to church on Easter, he is going to have Kentucky State Police at the churches, and they're going to put prosecution notice on your windshields if you go, indicating that you either have to quarantine for 2 weeks, so 2 weeks house arrest, or you'll be charged for violating KRS 39A, which is Kentucky's emergency statute, which carries violating KRS 39A carries a penalty of at least 6 months and at most 1 year in prison. I had people tell me not to go to church. I had people tell me to just let it go. The church ban will be lifted eventually, and I'm of the persuasion that you have a duty to follow God's law over man's law, and ultimately it is not the duty of the government or anyone for that matter to tell me whom I can worship or how I worship them. So I was dead set. I got up in the morning, and even though all of the churches around me were closed, I went to the closest one that was open, and that was Maryville Baptist Church. I went there. The service was amazing. There was this one couple who drove all the way from Connecticut to Maryville Baptist because Maryville was the only church that was really publicizing, we will be open and all are welcome. People I drove for, we're talking a 12-hour drive, Connecticut. I think that's what it would be. And sure enough, whenever I was done with the service, I came and I saw this prosecution notice. They were not bluffing on that. So I took that, I drove back home, I called my lawyer, and he said, as long as you're willing for every detail about this to become public, I will file a federal lawsuit for this. And I said, go for it. by the way, it's going to become public sooner than you think, Chris. And the reason why is because as soon as that was over, once I got home, I went on Facebook Live and I grabbed an AR-15 and I shot the prosecution notice. Just ammo was cheap back then, you know?
Yeah.
You could get away with doing that. We filed this federal lawsuit that challenged Andy Bashir's ban on church services. We also challenged him banning travel outside of the state of Kentucky, because there's clear set case law that says that you can travel, and it's up to the federal government to engage interstate commerce. The district court handed down a decision where they split the baby. They told us, you're right, Andy Bashir does not have the right to ban interstate travel, but they said that he has the power to ban church. We appealed to the Sixth Circuit, and in a decision that was written by a Trump, Obama, and Bush judge, that was the panel of it, so it was pretty diverse in terms of the viewpoints. They unanimously ruled that banning church, even in a pandemic, is an unconstitutional breach of your fundamental liberty. That was the impact of Roberts versus Nice. And then in November, Roberts made a resurgence whenever the Brooklyn Catholic Diocese sued Andrew Cuomo over his restrictions. And the Supreme Court ruled in a per curiam decision that Andrew Cuomo cannot do that. And particularly, the logic that they used for the Brooklyn Diocese versus Cuomo decision, they cited Roberts versus Nice. So throughout this whole thing, this lawsuit is what led to it being abundantly clear that the Constitution doesn't take a day off and that you still have the right to worship. Your First Amendment rights are intact even in a pandemic.
So how does it feel to have your name be part of some precedent like that?
It was amazing because, like, again, like, the hardest time to stand for liberty is whenever the masses don't want liberty. I received hundreds of death threats. My lawyer received thousands. I mean, there were people who share my last name who were publicly ridiculing me, who were threatening me, who were calling my mother, who were calling my grandparents and like saying that I'm insane and I'm giving us all a bad name and that I need to learn to shut my mouth whenever it's proper to do that. And seeing how unpopular this governor is now and seeing that my decision to go to church wound up setting it in motion to where the lockdowns are really falling apart in the federal courts, I mean, it's worth it. I mean, it just showed who talks liberty and who walks liberty. It just showed where people truly stood on these issues. And seeing Roberts versus Nice cited in the United States Supreme Court, it was just one of those things where it's like, it proved that you really can make a difference no matter how generally small your story is, that a simple act like this can spark this entire movement of, you know what, we are going to disobey these orders and we're going to stop living in fear. We're going to live as though we would anyway, because we're all going to die one day anyway. I mean, it felt amazing. Yeah.
And, you know, I don't want to get too personal, but did your family always have your back at this?
My mother and my grandparents and my sister did. There were other members of the family who absolutely did not, who, like, whenever things really started, I guess a lot of the people, I refer to them as COVID Karens. Whenever the COVID Karens saw the news story, I guess they looked me up and like found my social media, because there was a few days where my posts would nonstop get about 1,000 comments per post. And like, there were people, I'm going to keep their names out of it because I still respect them in a way, but it's just, they would literally use that as a means to try to be like, I'm this guy's, like, just for the sake of it, it wasn't any of my cousins, was like, I'm this guy's cousin, and I fundamentally disagree with him. Please let me have some attention too.
Right.
And it was just so gross because it was like literally what you were doing if you were siding with the governor is you were saying that the right thing to do is nothing. Just stay home. Shut your mouth. Stay inside, save lives, whatever they're calling it. It was one of those things where unremarkable people could be heroes because the heroic thing to do at the time was nothing based upon this whole thing. It just showed, like, you have to disrespect yourself quite a bit in order to say that your most heroic moment was whenever you were doing nothing.
Right. Yeah. Well, so the reason I ask is that there's several ways in which tyrants can keep people down, and a lot of that has to do with social pressure. And I think the best test case that we've seen for that has, of course, just been the last year. And there's so many things that come into it, man. Like, job security. I had a different job when this pandemic the pandemic started. I have a son. I have another son on the way. Worrying about my family or worrying about what my family's going to think, or there's that part in the Patriot with Mel Gibson. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie, but it's actually he strikes at a very profound point, because they're talking about whether or not North Carolina or South Carolina is going to levy to help the Continental Army, and he says, I'm a parent, I don't have the luxury of principles, and I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that?
It's true. I mean, there were people who were going to go to church with me who decided not to because of the pressure. Of course, I faced a lot of pressure, and even to this day, there are times where I'll think back and like, was I the bad guy in that situation? And that's one thing that, for me personally, that's a healthy reflection to look back and think about whether or not you're the bad guy. Because it really helps ground you in your principle. And this is totally off topic, but it's like, whenever you become so certain of your values that you are convinced that you are the good guy and anyone against you is evil and knows that they are evil, it becomes remarkably easy to commit atrocities against those who are against you. Like abandoning you as a family member, for example. But no, like, there was definite social pressure for me to just sit down, shut up. I kept going because just deep down, I knew I was doing the right thing. I knew this was going to make a difference. And sometimes you have to do that. Like, I don't blame the people who succumb to the pressure, because that's the natural nature of the human psyche. We're social animals. We seek approval. We want to do what is popular. And whenever you're going against a governor who has 80% approval, you have to just tunnel vision yourself and not think about what the people beside you are thinking.
So, you're currently in law school. You mentioned that, but do your classmates know about the case?
Some of them do. Some of them do. I've been a little selective about it. I have a feeling I'm coming to an end on this because I caught wind from a friend of mine who works at a certain publishing company that the constitutional law book that we're reading in my con law class next semester cites a certain case about banning church services during a pandemic. So, and every single second-year law school student is going to read that book. So I think the secret's going to be out here soon.
Well, that sounds great.
The people who know, like, either don't care or they think it's cool. So, I mean, it's not going to be that bad. I can survive it. I went to an undergrad university where I'm pretty sure I was the only person who was to the right of Hillary Clinton. In 2016, like, the whole thing of, like, taking pressure and just advancing anyway, I guess I've sort of preliminarily been training myself to go into law like this. And because in 2016, the day after the 2016 election, I was spit on for wearing a Rand Paul shirt. And that just emboldened me to get involved in more conservative libertarian groups. at my undergrad university. These people absolutely hated me because I was pretty much the only member of these organizations, but because I was a member of the organization, they couldn't just kick us off. So
that reminds me of my time. I went to the University of Minnesota in the Twin Cities, and this was back in 2011 to 2014. I graduated, and I was in Young Americans for Liberty, and we got told that we couldn't hand out constitutions on Constitution Day. So if I had been more radical at the time, I think I would have done something about it. But at the time, I wasn't like I'm an Austro-libertarian, like anarcho-capitalist now. But at the time, I was just like, oh, Ron Paul's pretty cool. I believe in liberty. This is important. But I wasn't really radical.
Yeah.
In a sense, I kind of felt like the organizers were wanting us to do that, to at least make a big hubbub about it. But I understand that you've been involved with the YAL, though.
I have, yes. Yeah. I was a state chair from 2016 through 2017, and I still will go to YAL events right now and like help out a YAL chapter if they're doing an event here in Kentucky and I'm not busy. So
yeah,
YAL is a special place in my heart. So
yeah, and so YAL did work with fire, right?
YAL did work with fire. They also do work with the Alliance for the Alliance Defending Freedom.
Yeah, and I feel like at the time, because I joined right in the crater of Ron Paul's 2012. So like
yes.
A few months before I joined, there were like so many people at YAL meetings that they couldn't fit them all in the room. And when I came in, there was 5 of us.
Yeah.
So and I felt maybe it would have been different had there been, 20 or 30 people and like a lot of other people doing it with me. But yeah. So anyways, I mean, what about this, the protest incident then?
Okay. So in May, myself, Tony Ramstick, Tony Wheatley, and and Frank Harris. He was so Tony Wheatley runs the nonprofit called Constitutional Kentucky. Tony Ramstick is an evangelist here in Kentucky, and Frank Harris was a libertarian candidate for Congress. We all decided to come together, put together a rally to protest the lockdowns because dine-in was still closed. There were hours capacity. The governor was starting to get on the whole mask mandate stuff. And we were just showing that, like, we are going to remember this. And the problem isn't even necessarily that the governor did this. The problem is that he has the power to do it at all. And we got a few legislators in on it to speak at this as well, to talk about their plans to reform the laws. We actually had Thomas Massey ready to come speak at this as well. And then the governor says that you're violating our mass gathering ban. You can't have more than 10 people here, and therefore we're going to deny this protest. And if you go through this protest, you're in violation of KRS 39A and face up to 1 year in prison. We fought a lawsuit before the protest. The judge ruled against us again. I guess getting embarrassed in Roberts versus Nice wasn't enough. So we appealed again, and the Sixth Circuit ruled that they cannot ban protests. Funny enough, the Sixth Circuit released that opinion 15 minutes after our rally had already started. So even though the district court had ruled for that, we were like, you know what? We're going to do it anyway. Turnout wasn't great because a lot of people were scared of going to jail. We still had about 200 people there, which isn't bad in Kentucky. About 200 people were there, and as soon as the decision was out, I made sure that the speakers were on. I called Chris, and I just put the phone up to the mic for him to just say, we've won. This is a legal gathering now. And we're not finished. We're going to continue suing this governor for every time he violates your constitutional rights. And we haven't stopped since.
That's awesome. And so let me ask you a bit of like a philosophical question then. So a lot of times it's said, and you'll hear this in like the agorist communities, is that, yes, we like to participate in counter economics. Yes, we like to defy unconstitutional laws. But of course, every time you do that, you're taking a risk. And on some part, I've heard people say basically, how much good do you do for liberty when you're in jail forever? Like tax evasion, something
Right.
like that. So what do you have any thoughts on that?
I think that civil disobedience is a noble idea. I also think it should be an absolute last resort. Um, like you can see with like King versus Birmingham. Even if your case is declared that you were right, you can still be held in contempt of court for violating the district court opinion, even though the circuit court or even the Supreme Court comes in for that. There's a very real risk. So again, I think it should be only as a matter of last resort, and at that point, I think we were at that last resort opinion because we were going to prove that there was irreparable harm. Like, these guys were going to arrest us. They placed snipers on the rooftop of the Capitol, had their people aiming at the speakers the entire time in case someone, I don't know, said something that hurt the governor's feelings or something. I think that resistance to tyranny is obedience to God. It's just one of those things that you have to be very careful about, and you have to think about when what's going to happen. But I'll just say this much: the rule followers can get things done, but it takes a healthy balance of people who are following the rules and people seeing like, okay, this rule is just so ridiculous, I'm not even going to bother, and if there was mass scale civil disobedience, these lockdowns would have been over much sooner. You can see that in Minnesota, for example. A good friend of mine went to Minnesota and helped encourage restaurants to just stay open no matter what, because in Minnesota, the health department has to put down this exorbitantly expensive bond in order to shut down these restaurants before the hearing. I think it's like $5,000 or something. So that adds up pretty quick. You get 40 businesses to refuse to shut down. These guys are going to have to put up $200,000, right? You're going to bankrupt the health department before they're going to be able to shut everyone down. So the question at that point is not who's going to let me, it's who's going to stop me.
Yeah, and that's a good mindset to have for sure. And the other thing that I thought about, because I've gone maskless when the city ordinances say that you have to wear a mask, like in businesses and stuff like that. Of course, it's more stringently enforced in other countries, some states, I guess, but around here, I always thought that if they fined me, then I would not pay the fine, and if they they arrested me for that, I would go on a hunger strike, kind of like Jordan Peterson. And
Yeah.
of course, it's easy for me to sit here after nothing having happened and say that I would do that, and another thing to do it if I actually got ticketed.
Yes.
But I mean, it's like the that Polish reverend from Canada. He that was just arrested on the highway. Have you seen that story?
Yes, it's horrifying that happens so close to here.
Yeah. And so there's that one, but I was also thinking about, what Jordan Peterson said and this was a while ago now, but with the speech mandate with the gender pronouns, he said I would hunger strike and I would just refuse to do it.
Yeah.
So do you have any thoughts on like where we're headed as a country in terms of like, the COVID lockdowns and what this kind of portends for liberty in the United States? Kind of a broad question.
It is. I see a lot of cases for optimism. Like, someone who supported me throughout this entire thing, but didn't really get it at the initial onset of things, was my mother. She supported me because she's my mom. She's going to support me in the things that I do, whether she agrees or not. And even though she actually agreed with me on this thing, she just didn't see it as necessarily worthwhile with the stand-ups on it. Now, though, she is adamant. Like, she was at work while watching the live stream of the court hearing that we just had on Monday against Governor Beshear for all of his mandates. I mean, I never would have thought that my mother, who voted for Barack Obama in 2008 and 2012, would go on to be, these lockdowns have to stop. I mean, it's made it to where people who otherwise really didn't care about politics, they care now because politics has revealed itself and has revered its ugly head toward everyone, to where now they truly realize that government is all about taking what you make and backing up their decisions by the barrel of a gun or the edge of a machete, depending upon where you live. I mean, I think there are some lost causes out there, obviously. I'm not saying let's go knock doors in California and get Bruce Jenner elected governor. I'm not saying let's go knock doors in New York and elect another Ron Paul in New York, right? That's never going to happen. But a lot of heroes have shown themselves to be heroes. You have out of I believe, I think it's Missouri, maybe. There's a guy named Eric Mortensen. You have people out of Pennsylvania. The people of Pennsylvania, despite them being a blue state generally, just came in and voted revoking the governor's power to declare emergencies like he had. Even here in Kentucky, where you have a bunch of milquetoast rhinos, people have woken up to this, and the Republicans are terrified. My own state representative, who is very much on the establishment side of things, who voted against impeaching Andy Beshear, who has always voted with the teachers union, things along those lines, they're so terrified that he's going to get run out in a primary. He has a fundraiser tomorrow, even though he's not even up for re-election until 2022. I mean, the political class is scared now, and that's forcing them to take positions that they otherwise would not take. In Florida, you have an absolute hero expose himself in the House who's now running for Congress. His name is Anthony Sabatini. I mean, this guy is brilliant. And you can see Florida itself, especially with Ron DeSantis in charge. Sure, there's some disagreements with like some of Ron DeSantis' other policies, but on the most important issue of our lifetime, which is the lockdowns, it's been about as close to perfect as possible. And we're starting to, at least now, we have so many people on the record of where do they truly stand. And even if that doesn't mean that America itself as a unitary country can be saved, there are regions geographically that can't. Florida is going to be safe. South Dakota is going to be safe. Missouri, I was pleasantly surprised by. Kentucky, we still have some growing pains, but the fact is, we have remarkable people in the state house and remarkable people that are going to be running for office here soon, who said, you know what, I'm not going to obey these orders. Let's just have some fun with it and let's see what happens. And let me talk about two particular restaurants. There's two restaurants in Kentucky called Beans and Brew. Beans is a cafe in Grant County. Brewed is a coffee shop in Lexington. Both of these restaurants refused to shut down, despite being in areas where the health department has a relatively strong hold. And these guys were like, we're not going to shut down. Go ahead. The owner of Beans was criminally charged for operating without a license. And yet people were so furious against the county attorney for filing these criminal charges, they dropped the charges on December 23rd. And funny enough, that same county attorney, his name might be a little familiar, the one who criminally charged the owner of Beans, his name is Robert Neese. He's the Neese in Roberts versus Neese.
Yeah.
He was the one that was designated to criminally charge me for going to church. And let's just say this much. Bob Neese will not be running for re-election in 2022. And we're seeing that happen everywhere. I mean, you can see in Ohio, for example, the Republicans have turned on their own governor, Mike DeWine. There are articles of impeachment pending against him in the House floor right now. So, I mean, I think there's a great deal of optimism here, where the people are finally seeing the damage government can do, and as a result, they're getting involved. They're paying attention. So, I mean, It's just making sure you channel that energy right and pushing it in a way that you can actually get good results out of.
Yeah, and I've seen, like people like my parents, they've always been kind of, like I don't want to say establishment, but they've been your regular kind of Republican types, conservatives. They've gotten pretty red pilled through this, and it makes me proud to see that. I like to claim a little bit for that because, I've been saying for years and years since like I started listening to Peter Schiff that the sky is falling. So
Yes.
I'm gonna have to ask you though, like, so a lot of my audience are more like agorist, kind of anti-voting. I don't want to say anti-voting, but they're very like, let's not be involved in politics at all. So have being part of this community, I'd say roughly the Austro-libertarian community. What do you have to say to those people about affecting change through the political system?
First thing to the agorist, I love every one of you. Um, and I mean that because it's like I can now, because of you guys, I can download the files to 3D print my own guns.
Yeah.
But I don't think agorism is mutually exclusive from getting involved. I know like one of the agorist battle cries is vote harder.
Yeah, right.
And I get it. Your vote is probably irrelevant. But I'll say this much. If you live in Owensboro, Kentucky, your vote isn't. There's a state representative named DJ Johnson. He's been a champion for getting the government out of education. He won his election by one vote.
Really?
Yeah. He won his election by one vote. So in that case, yes, please vote harder and vote for DJ Johnson because he's actually done some really good stuff. But like, so it can make a difference, but also even in areas where your vote doesn't necessarily make the difference, like say you live in a district like, I'm going to use my favorite state representative in Kentucky as an example, Savannah Maddox. You live in Savannah Maddox's district. Savannah won her first election in 2018 by such a wide margin that her Democrat opponent could have doubled his voter count and still would have lost. Your vote doesn't make much of a difference there. But your vote makes a difference in the primary. Whenever you look at the primary, it was Savannah Maddox versus Doctor. He's a nice guy, but we didn't have the utmost confidence in him in terms of, is he going to take a stand whenever the stand needs to be taken? Studies have shown that for every 17 doors you knock of eligible voters in a specified election, every 17 doors equals one vote. So whenever you're looking at a primary where where there's going to be about 2,000 people voting, that's about how many people show up to vote in a primary in Kentucky. 17,000 doors. You hire a team of 10 people. That's 1,700 doors each. They can get that done working part-time in a month. In that amount of time, with that many doors knocked, granted, we knocked 30,000 doors for Savannah because we wanted to make sure she got in. Because of what she promised she would do and what she kept and the promises she kept. Her first year as a representative, she introduced, got passed, and signed by the governor constitutional carry, which eliminated the permit requirement for carrying a concealed gun in Kentucky, and the Campus Free Speech Act, which stopped universities from censoring college students. She got all that done as a freshman state representative. I mean, it's just astounding what she's been able to get done. So in general, like, I mean, look, if you're talking as an agorist to me in Barack Obama versus Mitt Romney, sure, I don't care. As a matter of fact, if there's a very legitimate case, I'm not saying I would do this, but there's a case to be made for voting for Obama in that instance, because oftentimes the lesser of two evils is the greatest threat to liberty. I mean, think about it. George Bush got us the Patriot Act, Medicare Part D, No Child Left Behind, doubled the national debt, got us into endless wars, all of these things. What did that lead to? It led to a demoralized conservative liberty base. And as a result, the Democrats took the House and Senate, the Democrats took over, and we wound up with historically low conservative voter turnout. But then think about Barack Obama. We got, instead of Medicare Part D, we got Obamacare, which is just an extension of Medicare Part D. We got a continuation of the Patriot Act. We got even more endless wars. We got doubled national debt. But what did we get out of that? We got Rand Paul. We got Thomas Massie. We got Mike Lee. We got all of these conservative hardliners, even down in the state house level, right? We got a revolution in it that actually turned out to run out a lot of bad guys in both parties, right? So in a way, you could say that the lesser of two evils is the greater threat. But I think that whenever you're talking about getting involved in the elections, there's two legitimate reasons as an agorist. So even if you don't believe in politics, in my ideal system, politics doesn't exist. I'm anti-political in that way. But I get involved in politics because at the fundamental level, you can use elections to control the environment that politicians are in. You can punish a bad guy where you knock doors for his primary opponent because he voted against your bill. For example, if it's a school choice bill, pro-gun, pro-market, things that agorists and I tend to agree with, right? You can punish him, or you can elect a champion like Savannah Maddox. You can get an Anthony Sabatini into office. I'm not sure if people realize this, but in Wyoming from 2018 to 2020, the majority leader of the Wyoming State House was a literal anarcho-capitalist.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And I mean, he was so terrified that he was so terrifying to the establishment. Liz Cheney herself went in and bankrolled a primary opponent and ran him out of office. But the fact is, because of Tyler Lindholm's work that he did in office, Wyoming is the most crypto-friendly state. Like Tyler Lindholm just had his home re-roofed and paid the guy in crypto. Probably the first person to ever buy a roof using crypto, right? So that's the thing. Is like, absolutely engage in counter economics, engage in gray market. Go to your local farmer and buy a quarter of a cow from him under the table. Please do, because as of right now, with the current business situation, there's only 4 producers legally allowed to distribute meat to the general public. But that also shows, like with the gray market area of counter economics, I don't want that to be a gray market. I want that to be an open market. I want that to be for everyone, which is why, while I'm definitely not going to judge you if you go and purchase a quarter of a cow from a small farmer in your local area, I'm also going to go and lobby for Thomas Massie's Prime Act in Congress, right? I don't think that me doing one precludes me from doing the other.
And so, are you involved, like, and forgive me for not knowing this already, but are you involved in Libertarian Party politics, or do you do kind of the Republican Liberty thing?
Well, it's funny you say that, Patrick, because I'm happy to announce that I'm running for Boone County Precinct Captain for the Republican Party of Kentucky.
There you go. All right. Is this your first announcement?
Yes.
Oh, cool. Okay. Very cool. That's the first for the show. So, well, so you're going the Republican route. I guess that are you like Mises Caucus adjacent then? Because that's what I'm involved with more so.
You know, I love a lot of the people at the Mises Caucus. I respect them. What they did in Nevada, I almost wrote them a check. If I wasn't a broke law school student with a broken laptop,
Yeah.
I probably would write them a check over what they did in Nevada.
Yeah.
And with what Pennsylvania did to them. That was nonsense. My one problem is it always terrifies me. One of those books, like, I know it's a normie thing. I'm terrified of everyone becoming an Animal Farm. The Mises Caucus actually took over in Kentucky's LP. By all means, congratulations. Most of the people who were elected, I'm very proud of. My one problem, however, is that the chair of the Libertarian Party of Kentucky, he was a petitioner to impeach the governor, Andy Beshear, which that sounds like a really good thing, right? And I'm for that as well. Like, I'm skeptical of the strategy because it kind of put the ball into leadership's hands, and it's a bunch of rhinos in leadership. So, but the problem that I had with it, with this specific individual, was he backed out of the impeachment petition whenever the going got tough. He put out a letter This is the new Libertarian Party chair of Kentucky saying that Andy Beshear acted in good faith when he banned church, that he holds nothing against Andy Beshear, and that he should not be removed from office. So it was just this public praise of the guy. I tried to let leadership in the Mises Caucus know about this, and it mainly fell on deaf ears. It was disappointing, and I will say this much. I got into it a little personal with the main guy at the Mises Caucus, with Michael Heiss. I went personal. I shouldn't have. If Heiss is listening, I'm sorry. But it's just something that's just so passionate for me because the governor literally tried to put me in jail because I went to church.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
And you know what? I wouldn't have minded if he just backed out of the petition, if he just sent out a statement under oath saying, I don't want to be involved with this anymore. I could sleep at night and be like, okay, that I don't like the idea that you did that. One of the things that I have right up here is Morton Blackwell's Laws of the Public Policy Process. One of them is never fully trust someone until you have seen them finish a fight that they saw they were losing. I care about that. Once someone enters a fight, I want to see them finish it, unless they truly see that they were wrong to enter that fight on philosophical grounds. Like, I used to believe in Marcy's Law, for example, and then I'm like, oh God, this bill is disastrous for due process. Never mind.
Yeah.
Right? So that, I was proven wrong and I changed my mind. It wasn't that I was scared that the governor was going to charge me money if the petition failed. Right? And that's what happened there. This person, and again, even if you were scared of that, go for it. Back out. I'm not going to judge you. We're in financially hard times. I'm not going to be too upset over that. What I am going to be upset over is if you withdraw under the false pretext that now you think the governor is just fine and dandy and that it's totally okay to trample on people's constitutional rights as long as you do it in good faith. So that one sort of hurt me because it's like, if Nick Sarwark signed under oath a statement saying, I believe Andrew Cuomo acted in good faith when he banned church and banned the synagogues, the Mises Caucus would screenshot that and would send that out and make a fundraising email out of it, as they should, because you can't save the world if you can't pay the rent. So for the love of God, continue fundraising. It's a brilliant strategy and you need to do it to succeed. But apply those rules to your people as well. Right? So that's my one criticism, which you can just as easily come back at me and say, well, what about the Republicans? Shouldn't they have just impeached him anyway? Absolutely they should, and that's why I've been spending almost all of my free time recruiting primary opponents for those who chose not to impeach him. Right? I hold my own accountable. Or at least I try to.
Yeah, well, TJ, I'm not going to lie, I'm a little bit out of my element here because in terms of I've tried to grow and get involved with the LP Wisconsin Mises Caucus, and
Yeah.
we've done some stuff and recruited, but I guess I don't know too much about some of the actual politics and stuff going on there. But what you're saying, I think it does make sense to me. If there was a qualifier about the governor saying that, oh, maybe he is acting with good intentions, but my belief is that the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Right.
If you're a prison camp guard at Auschwitz and you murder a bunch of Jews with good intentions,
you're still going to get hung.
Right. Or, in a way that's even more evil than someone doing it with malice.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, but I think that's really interesting. So,
the whole idea that Andy Beshear did this in good faith, it's a lie. There's correspondence that the treasurer of Kentucky, Allison Ball, discovered in an audit. It was communications between Governor Beshear and the chief of Kentucky State Police. And the chief of Kentucky State Police said that this church ban and putting these prosecution notices on people's windshields is I'm quoting him, by the way, is clearly a First Amendment issue.
Yeah.
Andy Beshear's response was, I don't care, do it anyway.
Yeah.
That's not good faith. You knew it was a violation.
Right. And that's like when Tucker Carlson was it the governor of New Jersey on, and he said, well, you know, where do you get the authority to do this? And he says, well, we weren't thinking about the Bill of Rights.
Right.
But so I'm wondering if that, if in that instance, the New Jersey governor, if he's saying that, well, we just cared about saving lives and we drank the Kool-Aid so hard that, we just wanted to save everyone's life. We were doing this in good faith, I assure you. I mean, I don't believe it.
Right. And again, like if he had the very next day ended all of his lockdowns, I'd believe it.
Right. Yeah.
But also Andy Bashir, but also not only did Phil Murphy continue his lockdowns, even after the federal court said, dude, you can't be banning church. In November, he shut down religious schools, which is violating settled case law. And in the Brooklyn Diocese decision, it explicitly says that this religious exercise clause applies to religious schools. Yet, even after the United States Supreme Court ruled on this, Bashir kept religious schools closed for another 6 days. He was in contempt of court for 6 days. That's not good faith.
And did he face any consequences for that?
Of course not.
Yeah. Yeah. So then if you let me get like a bit more, I guess, legal theory on you, a lot of the work that I did in my final year in law school there's this brilliant paper written by William J. Watkins Jr., whom you might remember from the Tom Woods Show. Maybe not, because he was only on once or twice. He wrote this paper called it was about judicial review, and he talked about how it's not the final arbiter of constitutionality. And basically what he proposed in it was the clear case doctrine, which kind of saying that, well, in Marbury versus Madison, John Marshall, he declared the power to declare federal law unconstitutional through judicial review. William J. Watkins Jr. says, okay, that makes sense, but there was this string of case law that was clearly established in the state courts after the Constitution was passed, saying that if it's a clear case, if it's clearly unconstitutional, the court should strike it down. But if it's a close call, they should send it back to the legislature and have another vote on it, kind of like what Britain has with their judicial system. And I guess kind of what my question is like, well, there's obviously a deference to the government's laws being constitutional in the system. Is that something that we need to completely rethink? If you follow me, like, do you agree with me that if the legislature passes a law, it's more often than not kind of assumed to be constitutional? And that gives carte blanche to a situation like this, where they just declare an emergency and the onus is on us to challenge it in court 6 months from now. And I guess, I don't know, I'm answering my own question, but nullification then.
I love the idea of nullification. In fact, one of the movements I was involved in 2020 until everything got locked down was the Second Amendment sanctuary movement. My home county has an ordinance with force of law that bans any county resources going toward the enforcement of any gun law. And I love that. And you know what? Funny enough, with nullification, Kentucky sort of did that in a way with the governor declaring the emergencies. Whenever we went back into session, we passed Senate Bill 1, which restricts the governor's ability to declare an emergency down to 30 days. And if he wants to go further than 30 days, he has to call the legislature back into session to vote on whether or not to extend his emergency powers for an additional 30. So in a way, that's there. And also, there is, funny enough, the Kentucky Supreme Court did something similar to deferring to the legislature. It didn't exactly end the way I would want it to, but it was Bashir versus Acre, which was it was for the preliminary hearing on the constitutionality of Bashir's lockdown orders on the state level. Our case got up to the Kentucky Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court essentially argued that the legislature passed Senate Bill 150, which gave the governor the power to extend his emergency for as long as he wants, subject to legislative review next legislative session. So they ruled essentially that if they truly believe that the governor has abused this power, then it's up to the legislature to fix this. So in a way, that sort of happens at the state court level. The federal courts is an interesting one because the constitutional standard review there is so interesting with it, to where most things are rational basis, of course. I'm not so sure if I'd want the federal courts to do that, to where they defer to the legislature for a state, for like whether or not the state is violating a federal constitutional right. Like, for example, here in Kentucky, there's a bill that almost became law. It actually passed the Senate. It didn't make it out of the House, though. This bill would have made it a Class C, I believe, Class C or Class B misdemeanor to insult a police officer.
Yeah, I heard about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I called it the no cussy at copy bill. And this bill, like, was just so egregiously anti-free speech that, I mean, it was going to be struck down in a federal court as a clear violation of the First Amendment. I just don't know if I would want the federal court to be like, well, let's let the legislature review that again. You know, I think that should just be one of those things of like, okay, this is wrong. You guys can't enforce that law. But of course, I love the idea of legislators being able to nullify unconstitutional federal law, because there's a lot of unconstitutional federal law that manages to get through. And the existence of federal gun laws is just enough to pretty much say this needs to stop. The fact that the president can deploy members of the state National Guard out of the country without a declaration of war, it's abhorrent to the people who sign up for the military thinking that they're signing up to protect this country and its liberty with their lives. But then they wind up serving foreign interests on issues that Congress isn't even bold enough to declare war over.
Defendtheguard.us is the place to go for that.
Yep. A state senator for whom I campaigned in 2020, funny enough, she introduced Defend the Guard in Kentucky. It didn't move because we only have 30-day legislative sessions, and the entire theme of the 2021 legislative session was rein in Andy Bashir's power.
Yeah. Yeah.
But she has pledged to reintroduce the bill until it becomes law.
Awesome.
So, I mean, it's a crucial issue to me. I'm friends with some of the people over at Defend the Guards. Do you know Diego?
I don't, but I know Scott Spalding, who he's a friend of mine, and he was on this show.
Oh, excellent. So yeah, I mean, like, Defend the Guard it's a crucial issue.
Yeah. Like,
the National Guard should not be Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden's political puppet.
You know, it really harkens back to, this is another thing I wrote about in my 3L year. During the War of 1812, I believe there was National Guardsmen in Maine who refused, maybe it was Vermont, who refused to invade Canada.
Yep.
And that's just so badass. And I mean, you talk about the nullification issue. I've said so many times, it's like everyone debates the constitutionality of nullification. But if you go back in history, whoever doesn't have power believes in it, and whoever does have power doesn't believe in it. Right. And, you know, that switches 20 years. The Federalists didn't believe in it during the Alien and Sedition Acts. But then during the War of 1812, when they don't want to fight a war against Britain, then they believe in it again.
Yep.
So, yeah, it's crazy, man.
And I mean, we can see nullification happening in the real world right now. Marijuana is legal in some states.
Yeah.
That should not be the case under federal law. In fact, like, I don't know. Oh, shoot, who was this legislator? There was a legislator out of Michigan who introduced a bill called Make Gas Cans Great Again. It made it to where, so long as these gas cans were produced, marketed, and sold only in Michigan, you could disregard the EPA rules on those gas cans, those horrendous gas cans that we all have to have now. I don't know where that bill went, if it went anywhere, but I know it's there. Like, which I love that. Which my whole question is, could we nullify the NFA with legislation like that? So long as your machine gun is manufactured and sold in Kentucky.
There's just yeah, I can see wonderful opportunities for machine guns thriving
Yes.
in Kentucky, a private market. And taking nullification even a step further, I mean, if a state can declare a federal law unconstitutional, what's stopping a county from declaring a state law unconstitutional? And if a county, can declare a state law unconstitutional, what's stopping a municipality or a township?
And what about your own house?
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah.
I'm a radical decentralist, which is a code word for a word that I don't want to use because I might be running for office for like big time office in 2 years. So
yeah. I think my theory is that Ron Paul dog whistles to folks like me. Talks about voluntarism, and that's kind of the farthest he will go.
Yeah.
But I know
the thing is that voluntarism is nothing more than a negation of the monopoly on violence.
There you go. So, all right. Well, go ahead and can you tell people? I mean, do you have a website that you're preparing to launch for your campaign, or where can people find your work?
I'm not doing a website for the campaign because, like, back to what I was saying with like how your vote doesn't necessarily matter, but depending on how low down it is, it can. For a Republican Party precinct convention, people don't show up for those things.
I see.
The winner is the people who show up. I'm probably going to knock on like 20 doors of friends that I know I share a precinct with and be like, hey, are you registered Republican? Cool. You want to come with me and help me get into this position? Like, that's pretty much what I'm going to do. And I'm going to do like the week before.
Yeah.
Because because like, it's just a matter of who shows up at that point. I'm not going to be on any like direct ballot that everyone gets to vote on or anything like that. I'm just going to be involved with this whole thing. And like, it's one of the things that actually sort of made me get involved with it is the people who are precinct captains at the county level get to vote in regards to the party decisions at the state level. And the chair of the Republican Party of Kentucky donated to Steve Beshear for governor. Not a huge fan of that.
Yeah.
But I mean, just but yeah, I mean, my Facebook page really is the best way to do it. I run a nonprofit called Kentucky Liberty. Our website's a little bit outdated right now, but it's kyliberty.org. This just shows some of our priority legislation, some of the things that we managed to get through. Like the same person, by the way, who introduced the bill to defend the guard, she also introduced a bill that we managed to get through, and the governor actually let it become law without a signature because he realized we would overturn his veto if he vetoed it. We abolished mandatory vaccination in the state of Kentucky. That's the power that you have. Like, you can make a difference by pushing legislation and confronting the politicians by mobilizing the people.
So, and that's huge. I mean, I didn't talk about how I stand on like voting and all that kind of stuff too. I agree with you. We need to do everything that we can to put liberty forward. And the things that you've talked about, the changes you've been able to make, these are huge. I mean, constitutional carry, that's huge. Getting rid of mandatory vaccination, that's like one of the biggest issues of our time right now, in my opinion. And aside from the war stuff, defend the guard. That's another huge. I mean, when we're libertarians, we talk about what are the biggest issues. Anti-war, anti-Fed, and anti. I said Fed, anti-war, anti-Fed, and I'm missing one big one, which makes
anti-lockdown.
Yeah, anti-lockdown.
Like that's the short-term issue. I mean, for me, it's anti-war, anti-Fed, anti-centralization,
anti-drug war. I'm just. I was missing that one.
Drug war killed my dad. That's a big one for me.
Yeah. Well, shit. We have a lot to talk about still, but I got to call it a night, man. But we'll have to do this again. And do you have other like podcast appearances? I know you were on Tom Wood's show, but if people want to follow you,
I have a couple of appearances. Roads to Liberty has had me on a few times. Of course, the Tom Wood Show. There's some local news appearances that I've been on. I did a I did a couple of debates at one point. I'm not sure if they're still up. I know it's a controversial group in the Liberty Network, but I used to be the managing editor for Liberty Hangout. I left in 2018, but there was a debate that I did once, which you're from the Austro-libertarian line, so I'm sure you'll know where this debate, like what my line of attack was. The resolution was monarchy is a preferable state system to democracy.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm sure you know where that's from.
Yes, yes, yes. Well, I'm of the Hoppian persuasion myself. So
Very good. You know, I've got to meet Dr. Hoppe before.
did you? Wow.
Yes. He's actually very funny in person. Very good guy.
I'm sure. Yeah, and you've seen the pool noodle picture, right?
Yes.
That's my favorite Hoppa. So. All right, man. Well, it's been a real pleasure. I'm really glad that we were able to do this. I know we've been trying to schedule for a while, but I know how law school is, and I assure you that buying a house and moving is not fun.
I could imagine, yeah. But congratulations on having a kid on the way, and congratulations on the new home too.
Yeah, thanks, man, and best of luck with your campaign. And you know, I'm excited to watch what you do for Liberty in the future. And thanks for what you've done already.
Absolutely, thank you.